Welcome to Tramp World. In 1985, Coca Cola made a decision that they thought was brilliant but turned into one of the most famous corporate mistakes in history. After nearly a century of success, the company faced stiff competition from Pepsi and feared losing its place as the world's favorite soft drink. In response, they created a new formula, one they were convinced tasted better, smoother and more modern. On paper it looked like a bold and smart move, but reality told a very different story. What Coca-Cola didn't realize was that this wasn't just a beverage for people, it was a piece of their identity. Coca-Cola wasn't just something you poured into a glass, it was Christmas with family, long summer afternoons and moments of comfort. The formula lived in people's memories. So when the company took it away without asking, they weren't just changing a drink, they were breaking an emotional bond. Millions of people reacted not with excitement but with outrage. Phone lines lit up with complaints, protests were organized, and loyal customers hoarded cans of the original Coca-Cola like treasure. The company thought it was selling a better product, but what people wanted was the familiar one, the one tied to their stories and emotions. This disaster forced Coca-Cola to face a truth that data and taste tests couldn't measure. Human beings don't just consume products, they build relationships with them. And when that relationship is interrupted, the sense of betrayal is deep. This was not just a marketing error, it was a failure to understand vulnerability and connection. But out of this painful mistake came an important act of courage. Coca-Cola admitted they had been wrong and they restored the original formula as Coca-Cola Classic. That decision wasn't just about fixing a recipe, it was about rebuilding trust. It was a public act of humility and accountability, and it taught us that even the largest companies cannot thrive if they forget the human side of their story. The new Coke disaster became a powerful reminder that success is never only about innovation or competition. It's also about listening, honoring traditions, and respecting emotions. Courage is not pretending to be perfect, courage is being willing to admit when you have misstepped and daring to repair the connection. So this isn't only the story of a failed soda, it's a story of leadership, humility, and the power of human connection. Mistakes are inevitable, but how we respond to them defines whether they remain disasters or become turning points of growth and trust. The story of New Coke in 1985 wasn't just about a soda, it was about human emotion and connection, because Coca-Cola was never simply a drink sitting on grocery store shelves, it was an icon woven into the culture of millions of people around the world. For decades, Coca-Cola had been a symbol of joy, tradition, and even nostalgia, reminding people of holiday gatherings, family dinners, and summer afternoons with friends. When the company decided to change the formula, they underestimated how deeply personal this brand had become. They saw a beverage, but customers saw memories. They saw a market strategy, but customers saw an attack on something familiar and comforting. The outrage that followed was not just about taste but about loyalty and belonging. People did not want to lose what Coca-Cola represented in their lives, a reminder of stability, identity, and shared moments. The new Coke disaster showed us that when businesses forget the emotional bond that people have with what they love, they risk losing far more than sales. They risk losing trust and connection, which are much harder to rebuild than any recipe. Coca-Cola, a cultural icon, underestimated the bond people had with tradition and memory, because for nearly a century the brand had not just sold a beverage, it had sold a sense of belonging and identity. The red can and its familiar taste were stitched into moments that defined people's lives, from celebrations to quiet evenings at home. It was a drink passed down through generations, a bridge between the past and the present. Yet when the company introduced New Coke in 1985, they treated it as though it were only about flavor, forgetting that the original formula had become something far deeper. It had become an emotional anchor. People didn't just enjoy the taste, they associated it with childhood comfort, family rituals, and even national pride. And when that was suddenly taken away, it felt like a betrayal. Coca-Cola failed to see that loyalty is not built only on product quality but on the invisible threads of memory and tradition that connect people to what they consume. This mistake revealed that when a company overlooks the emotional weight of what it represents, it risks unraveling the trust and attachment that took decades to build. The company believed numbers and taste tests could predict human behavior, but people are more than data, and that was the blind spot at the heart of the new Coke disaster. Coca-Cola conducted extensive market research, running blind taste tests across the country where participants consistently preferred the sweeter, smoother formula of New Coke over both Pepsi and the original Coke, the numbers looked flawless, the data pointed to success, yet what those charts and surveys could not capture was the emotional weight people carried with the original recipe. Taste was only one piece of the relationship customers had with Coke. The bigger piece was memory, belonging, and tradition. Those things don't show up in spreadsheets or bar graphs. The company assumed that rational preferences would override emotional attachment, but human beings don't live there. Lives guided only by numbers, they live by stories, connections, and meaning. New Coke revealed that no matter how precise data may seem, it can never fully measure human loyalty or predict how people will feel when something they love is taken away. It was a costly reminder that businesses must balance analytics with empathy, because people are never just statistics, they are hearts, histories, and lived experiences. The disaster showed that mistakes often come from ignoring human stories and values, and that is exactly what happened in 1985 when Coca Cola thought they were simply replacing one product with another. What they overlooked was that Coca Cola was never just a drink to millions of people, it was a symbol of home, of family dinners, of summer barbecues, of moments shared across generations. When the company stripped that away without listening to those stories, it wasn't just a new formula being introduced, it was trust being broken, it was identity being overlooked, it was tradition being erased. The failure of New Coke was not that the soda tasted bad, it was that the company failed to recognize that people build meaning around the things they love, and when you dismiss those meanings you risk severing the very bonds that connect you to your community. This mistake teaches us that numbers can mislead when they aren't paired with human voices and values. Behind every consumer is a person with emotions and history, and if those are ignored, even the most well-intentioned changes can collapse into failure. Vulnerability emerged when Coca-Cola admitted their error and brought back the original formula, and that moment of humility became one of the most powerful parts of the entire story. Instead of pretending nothing went wrong or trying to convince the public that they had made the right decision, Coca-Cola openly acknowledged that they had misjudged the depth of connection people had to their product. It was an act of courage to say we were wrong, and it allowed millions of loyal customers to feel seen, heard, and respected. What made this act so impactful was that it showed a global giant like Coca-Cola could embrace vulnerability and still thrive instead of destroying their brand. The mistake and the admission of error actually deepened the relationship between the company and its consumers. It reminded people that even the biggest corporations are run by human beings who can miscalculate, who can stumble, but also who can listen, learn, and change. Vulnerability in that moment wasn't weakness, it was strength, and it proved that trust can be rebuilt not by perfection but by honesty. The episode proved that humility can restore trust even after failure, because when Coca-Cola chose to step back, admit its mistake, and reintroduce the original formula, it showed the world that pride doesn't have to stand in the way of growth. In fact, that single act of humility transformed what could have been remembered only as a marketing disaster into a powerful lesson in leadership and connection. It reminded everyone that trust is not built by pretending to be flawless but by being real enough to admit when something went wrong. The return of the classic formula wasn't just about taste, it was about validation. It was the company saying to millions of customers, your voice matters, your memories matter, and we value the bond we share. This act of humility didn't weaken the brand, it strengthened it, and the loyalty that followed proved that when leaders put aside ego and choose authenticity, they create a deeper relationship that no competitor can replicate. Humility in this sense became the bridge between failure and redemption, turning a moment of loss into a long-term legacy of trust. The New Coke mistake reminds us that leadership isn't about never failing, it's about learning, connecting, and having the courage to course correct, because no matter how much data, research, or strategy we put into a decision, there will always be moments when the outcome doesn't match our intentions. In 1985, Coca-Cola thought it was making a bold move toward innovation, but what it really uncovered was how deeply people value tradition, identity, and belonging. Instead of burying the mistake or doubling down, the company eventually chose a different path. They listened, they admitted fault, and they acted to repair the bond that had been shaken, and that choice became a model of what true leadership looks like. It's not about wearing the mask of perfection or pretending mistakes don't happen, it's about acknowledging them, embracing vulnerability, and showing others that failure can be a stepping stone to something greater. The New Coke story reveals that the leaders who earn trust aren't those who always get it right, but those who are brave enough to pivot when they get it wrong, and in doing so they show that the most powerful form of strength is the willingness to be human. In the end, the New Coke disaster stands as more than a business case, it is a human story, a reminder that Success is not defined by the absence of mistakes but by the way we respond when mistakes inevitably arrive. Coca Cola stumbled in 1985, but in choosing humility over pride and connection over ego, they turned failure into one of the most powerful lessons in leadership. It teaches us that whether in business or in life, people do not expect perfection, they expect honesty, care, and the courage to change. When we hold on to these truths, we discover that even in failure there is room for growth, trust, and renewal.